Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast. Now, for the first few weeks of this series, we're going to continue until we finish A Long Expected Party. Last time, we witnessed a rather tense conversation between two old friends as the subject of Bilbo leaving the ring behind was pressed. Today, Bilbo concedes the point and leaves Bag End for the very last time. Without the ring, thankfully. Bilbo drew his hand over his eyes. "I am sorry," he said, "but I felt so queer. And yet, it would be a relief, in a way, not to be bothered with it anymore. It has been so growing on my mind lately. Sometimes I have felt it was like an eye looking at me. And I'm always wanting to put it on and disappear, don't you know? Wondering if it is safe, and pulling it out to make sure. I tried locking it up, but I found I couldn't rest without it in my pocket. I don't know why, and I don't seem able to make up my mind." "Then trust mine," said Gandalf. "It is quite made up. Go away and leave it behind. Stop possessing it. Give it to Frodo, and I will look after him." Bilbo stood for a moment, tense and undecided. Presently, he sighed. "All right," he said with an effort. "I will." Then he shrugged his shoulders and smiled rather ruefully. "After all, that's what this party business was all about, really. To give away lots of birthday presents and somehow make it easier to give it away at the same time. It hasn't made it any easier in the end, but it would be a pity to waste all my preparations. It would quite spoil the joke." "Indeed, it would take away the only point I ever saw in the affair," said Gandalf. "Very well," said Bilbo. "It goes to Frodo with all the rest." He drew a deep breath. "And now I really must be starting, or somebody else will catch me. I have said goodbye, and I couldn't bear to do it all over again." He picked up his bag and moved to the door. "You have still got the ring in your pocket," said the wizard. "Well, so I have," cried Bilbo, "and my will and all the other documents, too. You'd better take it and deliver it for me. That will be safest." "No, don't give the ring to me," said Gandalf. "Put it on the mantelpiece. It will be safe enough there till Frodo comes. I shall wait for him." Bilbo took out the envelope, but just as he was about to set it by the clock, his hand jerked back, and the packet fell on the floor. Before he could pick it up, the wizard stooped and seized it and set it in its place. A spasm of anger passed swiftly over the hobbit's face again. Suddenly, it gave way to a look of relief and a laugh. "Well, that's that," he said. "Now I'm off." They went out into the hall. Bilbo chose his favorite stick from the stand, then he whistled. 3 dwarves came out of different rooms where they had been busy. "Is everything ready?" asked Bilbo. "Everything packed and labeled?" "Everything," they answered. "Well, let's start then." He stepped out of the front door. It was a fine night, and the black sky was dotted with stars. He looked up, sniffing the air. "What fun! What fun to be off again, off on the road with dwarves! This is what I've really been longing for years. Goodbye," he said, looking at his old home and bowing to the door. "Goodbye, Gandalf." "Goodbye for the present, Bilbo. Take care of yourself. You are old enough, and perhaps wise enough." "Take care. I don't care. Don't you worry about me. I'm as happy now as I've ever been, and that is saying a great deal. But the time has come. I'm being swept off my feet at last," he added. And then, in a low voice, as if to himself, he sang softly in the dark. "The road goes ever on and on, down from the door where it began. Now far ahead the road is gone, and I must follow, if I can, pursuing it with eager feet, until it joins some larger way where many paths and errands meet. And whither then? I cannot say." He paused, silent for a moment. Then, without another word, he turned away from the lights and voices in the field and tents, and followed by his 3 companions, went round into his garden and trotted down the long sloping path. He jumped over a low place in the hedge at the bottom and took to the meadows, passing into the night like a rustle of wind in the grass. Gandalf remained for a while, staring after him into the darkness. "Goodbye, my dear Bilbo. Until our next meeting," he said softly, and went back indoors. A few observations from this passage that I want to make here. First, did you catch Bilbo's description about how the ring had been growing on his mind? Specifically, he said, and I don't know that I've caught this before, sometimes I have felt it was like an eye looking at me. Now, how is that for foreboding? I mean, Gandalf doesn't know this is the One Ring yet. We don't know this is the One Ring yet, but we are getting there. This is Tolkien drawing those connections. And then, of course, we get the language of addiction, always wanting to put it on, wondering if it is safe, trying to lock it up, but couldn't rest without it. And yet at the end, Bilbo still actually manages to give it up. It's a moment that goes without any really big pointers of significance in the text, but it is very much that. We get that brief look of anger coming over Bilbo's face, but then suddenly it gave way to a look of relief and a laugh. That's massive. The fact that he could give it up and walk away, well, that's that, is something that no one else could have done, really, especially after that long a time possessing it. Now, the mention of the dwarves is interesting, right? 3 dwarves came out of different rooms where they had been busy. I'd sort of hoped these would be dwarves from his adventuring days, but as it turns out, they're not. As I learned in The Return of the Shadows, Volume 6 of History of Middle-earth, the dwarves, they have names. They were given names in the older drafts, but they were none that we recognize. They were Nar, Anar, and Hanar. There was also a 4th dwarf at the time that we don't see in this text, named Lofar. Christopher Tolkien explains in a note that my father took all these 4 dwarf names from the same source in the Old Norse Elder Edda as those in The Hobbit. Well, of course he did. But it's this version of the road poem that I really like. It's the one in the middle, right? In The Hobbit, Bilbo's road poem said that roads go ever on and on. It was sort of the generic roads, multiple roads. And it spoke of all the places in the world, in nature especially, that the road would go by. But here we have the road. And rather than a description of where the road goes, we have an acknowledgement that it doesn't matter. Instead, Bilbo has a duty to follow it eagerly even, despite the fact that he doesn't know the destination. Now, someday we'll read Bilbo's 3rd version of the road poem in many partings. For now, though, take a listen to episode 328 of the Prancing Pony podcast to hear James Tauber and I talk at length about it, as well as the evolution of the 3 versions of the poem. Well, actually 4 if you count Frodo's recitation. For now, though, folks, thank you for joining me for this week's Third Age Thursday. We will continue until we finish this chapter, which should take another 3 weeks after this, so be sure to keep tuning in. Check out patreon.com/Tolkien Times to learn how you can support the show, get an ad-free feed, join the Content Council, get a bonus weekly episode, and more. And join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times for more in the Lay of Lathian. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. Please follow or subscribe in your podcast apps, and follow @Tolkien Times on all your social media. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.